George, how's it going?
Going good. I'm sorry, I was eating chicken and waffles.
So let's get a plug for the local businesses. Where'd you go?
Thelma's. Chicken and waffles. The waffles were my breakfast, and the chicken was my lunch. And I had it together on one plate.
Well, we're 4 minutes early. What do you think? Should we kick it off or wait for anyone else to get here?
Let's go.
All right, let's go. If they're late, they're late. A bunch of you were already here for the interview yesterday. I'm going to do my best not to repeat what Rich already did so well, and we'll try and cover some new material here.
Because I'm tired of the old material.
I can imagine. You've been doing this so much. You've got to be talked out by now.
I was talked out about 4 years ago, actually. I think I ran entirely out of things to say. So
when was the last time that you got to go to a convention incognito?
It doesn't happen. I don't remember. That would be a long time ago.
I guess maybe Worldcon you get to blend in a little bit more.
To some extent, but not these days, not as much as you might think. Even at Worldcon, I mean, like I was saying at the other interview, you start out in whatever profession you're in, and dreaming of fame and fortune, and having achieved it, I can say that fame is wonderful, or fortune is wonderful, but fame, maybe I'd give some of it back. It's and the internet, of course, not only the public stuff, the personal stuff, but the internet makes everything magnified. Well, I just have to. I post on my blog that I've got a cold, and suddenly the Huffington Post is George R. R. Martin laid up in bed, maybe dying.
Well, you've done something that no one has done in the last 50 years. You've broken through Asimov, Bradbury, Clark. No one since then has become a household name like you have.
Stephen King.
Stephen King, sure. I was thinking sci-fi fantasy, but I guess you could lump him in there.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I know he's faced some of the same travails. Someone asked King in an interview, if you had to do over again, would you do it the same way? And he said, well, mostly I try not to get run over by a truck. That was hard. And then the other thing he said that I thought was interesting is I would never do that American Express commercial. Because after before that he was like a #1 bestseller multiple times. He was a millionaire. He had a great deal of success, but he could still go out into the world and just be a person. But after the American Express commercial, like everybody in the world knew what he looked like, and anywhere he went, he was stopped and had to be on all the time.
Have you had anything similar? Any fame experiences that you would have gone back and not done?
Well, it's hard to separate them. I mean, in my case, I think everybody got to know who I was because of the show and the fact that when we did the TV show, we cast a lot of actors who, although they were brilliant actors, were not widely known. Sean Bean was the only real name actor in our show. Now, many of them are stars now. Amelia Clark, sexiest woman in the world. Kit Harington, etc. Numerous of our people are international celebrities now, but they weren't at the time. But I was already a #1 bestseller, so they made me the centerpiece of a lot of the advanced publicity, and that kind of put me front and center and has resulted in where we are now, which has had both good and more problematical impact on my life.
How was your appearance on Z Nation? Was that fun to do?
Yeah, it was. Michael Cassett, who is an old friend and collaborator of mine, we worked together on Twilight Zone many years ago, and on Max Headroom to some extent. is on that show. So I did it because he asked me to do it, and I got a couple of my assistants in there. They were thrilled by the idea of being zombies. And it was fun. But it takes hours. I mean, you're pretty much there all day, even though you only have 12 seconds on camera, getting into makeup and then getting out of the makeup and waiting around while they set up this shot and the other shot.
It was a good gag, too.
It was, yeah. Z Nation's a fun show. It's I don't know if you guys have watched it, but it's a zombie show, but it doesn't take itself too seriously. It's like The Walking Dead, but with its tongue very firmly in cheek, and a lot of very goofy things are happening on Z Nation, much of which is my friend Michael Cassett's twisted sense of humor.
You mentioned...
I also got my head bit off in Sharknado 3. So I've died twice on camera, or well, I guess I was already dead.
Yeah, you're already dead.
In Z Nation.
You mentioned your assistants, and I know you have several of them.
I have 5 at the moment, yes.
I just want to real quick give a call out for a lot of people that probably aren't familiar with the connection. One of your, I don't know if he's currently an assistant or formerly an assistant, but he's worked on several of your projects, Daniel Abraham.
Daniel Abraham was never my assistant, but he was my friend and collaborator. Ty Frank, who works with him, was my first assistant.
Ty was, okay.
So Ty was my assistant for years, yeah.
What are Ty and Daniel doing?
The Expanse. The Expanse television show, and also the Expanse books, which, the 5th one just came out.
It was I didn't realize at first that Corey was the two of them. So that was a nice little tidbit to learn, because I've been a fan of some of their work over the years.
By the way, is Brian still here? Brian?
Yes.
Yeah, I should, since you brought up the subject of my assistants, I should say for public service announcement here that I came to this particular convention without any assistants. But Brian was telling us on the way to Chicken and Waffles that last night in the bar there was someone saying that they were my assistant and were helping me with a book, and this was a young man of some sort who was saying this to a fetching young woman. I hope none of you fetching young women in the audience went to bed with anyone last night on the assumption that he was my assistant, because I have no assistants at this convention.
Your name carries some weight there, apparently.
I guess so, yes.
Let's talk about New Mexico. How did you end up with such a solid, packed grouping of authors in New Mexico, of all places?
Well, New Mexico is a great place to live. The land of enchantment, we call it. It's a wonderful state, and the climate is fabulous. We have the best Mexican food in the world, which is incredibly addictive, and especially the green chili. There were a few science fiction writers who lived in New Mexico for most of their lives, like Jack Williamson. Even Jack was not a native New Mexican. He came to New Mexico in a covered wagon, but when he was like 3. But that's actually true. But other people will move there just because it was a great place to live, and someone would move there and say, "Oh, this is great here," and then other people would move there. So Roger Zelazny and Fred Saberhagen and yada yada yada, many other people. So we do have a large group of science fiction and fantasy writers down there in New Mexico, in Albuquerque and Santa Fe.
A lot of which have worked with you on projects, several of which have been involved in Wildcards.
Wildcards, yeah. Well, Wildcards actually began out of a role-playing game that we were playing in, as I said, in one of my other sessions here. We were playing a superhero role-playing game, and it became addictive, and we wasted like a year and a half on it, and we finally said, we got to figure a way to get some money out of this, so we made it a shared world anthology, and 30 years later, it's still going strong. So
exactly 30 years later now.
Came up with something pretty cool there.
Yeah, that amazes me. 22 books in, 23rd book coming out later this year,
and 3 more just signed. So
excellent. Still with Tor?
Tor, yeah.
fantastic. But keeping that large of a group of authors and that large of a universe and that many characters going, the Wildcard Trust must have been very important in that. How did you set that up?
Well, I was fortunate in that by the time we came up with Wildcards, there was several other shared world anthologies going. And I don't know if there's a lot of young people here discussing young people. But you may not remember the 80s, but in the late 80s, the shared world anthology was very trendy. There was a series called Thieves' World that Robert Lynn Aspirin and Robert Aspirin and Lynn Abbey edited together, and that was very, very popular. It actually began as an argument in the bar at a Worldcon about who would win, Conan or Elric, and from the desire to see these great heroes in the same universe together, meeting each other, and they invented this fantasy shared world, Thieves' World, that it was so popular that everybody started doing shared world anthologies, and Thieves' World was the most successful, but there was also Leovac, and there was Ithcar, and there was Heroes in Hell, and there was War World, and yada yada. Greystone Bay, there were horror shared worlds and science fiction shared worlds and fantasy shared worlds, and we did the superhero shared world. But we were like number 6 in this trend here, and so therefore I was able to talk to Aspirin and Abbey in Thieves' World and find out all the horrible things that had gone wrong with that book, and they weren't prepared. Since they were the pioneers, they didn't know the kind of problems that could arise, and they had to fix them retroactively, and they'd come up with this master agreement. Finally, they had to pay lawyers, many tens of thousands of dollars to draw up for them because,